Microphone's on. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar, How to Help Your Child During COVID. I will be your moderator tonight. My name is Tracy Weiner. I am a District 58 parent, and I have a freshman daughter at Downers Grove North and a 7th grade son at Herrick. Joining with us tonight is our District 58 Superintendent, Dr. Kevin Russell, along with our special guest, Dr. Elizabeth Levy, a child and adolescent psychiatrist based out of Chicago. Tonight has been made possible through the fine folks at the Education Foundation of District 58. We are grateful for all the wonderful things the Education Foundation does in our community. And I'd like to take this time right now to introduce Janet Alec-Pala, the president of the board of directors for the Ed Foundation. Janet, thanks for joining us. Is your mic on?
My mic is on.
As we get started here this morning, could you just give a little summary about what the Education Foundation does and where parents can find out more information about your organization?
Sure. Thanks, Tracy. Good evening to everybody. Thanks for joining us. Again, my name is Janet Alec-Pala. I'm the president of the Education Foundation of Downers Grove District 58. We're excited to be part of this first webinar on the very important topic of how to help your child during COVID and to discuss ways we can help to maneuver through this unprecedented time. I want to share a little bit about the Education Foundation. We're a volunteer nonprofit organization that was founded to be an advocate of quality education and to raise necessary funds for programs within our school district. Each year, we're proud to host and support programs such as Sneak Preview, an open house program for incoming middle schoolers at O'Neill and Herrick Middle Schools, the Green Apple Awards, the Distinguished Service Awards, Select 58 Essay Awards, and Teachers Grants. You might have even attended our signature events such as Oktoberfest in downtown Downers Grove and the Harlem Wizards basketball event. I'm proud to serve on this foundation with 17 other volunteer board members that devote their time and talent to help increase awareness about our organization, as well as to find ways to increase funding and to continue our current programs and to develop new ones to fit the needs of our growing and changing community. This webinar will be one of many programs that we want to continue, and we can't do this without your support. So let us know about other topics that you'd like for us to cover in this webinar series. Email us at 58foundation@gmail.com. I'll put that in the chat. And if you're interested in becoming a board member, our foundation would love to have you, and we're always looking for new members to help further the mission of District 58. Also, for those of us that couldn't join us tonight, we'll also have this available on the District 58 YouTube channel, as well as the Education Foundation Facebook page. So thanks so much for joining us tonight, and enjoy the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Okay, so let's get started. At this time, we are very excited to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Levy, who will help us navigate and support our kids during these stressful times during COVID. Tonight's focus is about children's social emotional needs and how to best support them during this time of uncertainty when nothing is normal and everything is always changing. So after a brief discussion, my co-pilot, Dr. Russell, and I will get right to your questions. We got a lot of questions ahead of time, and you're able to, I think you could submit questions in the chat as well. And we're just going to try to get through as many questions from you at home as possible. So Dr. Levy, if you had wanted to start with a little bit of an introduction, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, that sounds great. So it's great to be here with everybody this evening. Just let you know a little bit about myself and my background before we get started. I'm a child psychiatrist. I'm a clinician and a researcher at Harvard Medical School, and I also have a private practice here in Chicago. I study how children and families respond to all kinds of stressful events and build strength and resilience. I've done this with children in Liberia, with pregnant teenagers in Peru, families in the Mississippi Delta, and families here in Chicago. I'm also the mother of a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and wondering whether the Chicago schools will ever reopen. So I get it as a parent as well. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I know that no time of day is easy right now, but dinner time can be really tough. So thank you for joining us, and I hope this can be as useful as possible. So people sent in some terrific questions. So we really want to spend this time responding to the questions that all of you have. Some of the topics that came up were related to managing anxiety, keeping kids engaged and motivated, setting limits and expectations with kids during this time. I'm happy to speak about these topics or others that are on your mind. Because if you're wondering about it, other parents probably are as well. And one other thing I'll mention before we jump into it is, there's just so much uncertainty right now about what's going to happen and what we should do. And so I think, everyone wants a right answer, a perfect formula, always. And I think especially when we're anxious. And the reality is that, there are so many unknowns. And so I think, in the absence of certainty, really trusting ourselves as parents, I think is often, the best thing that we can do for our kids, because we know our kids the best. And so really kind of trusting your gut about, what's going on and what your kids need. I would say don't be afraid to do that, because nobody knows any better than you. So let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna hit through as many as we possibly can. The first one comes in from a parent at Herrick. How can middle schoolers make new friends and feel a sense of belonging and acceptance during COVID? And I will bookmark this a little bit, just so you know, Doctor. Herrick Middle School is 7th and 8th grade. So for the 7th grade class, at least, it's their first time in a middle school setting, in a brand new building where they've not been at before, and they've spent their last 6 years in another building with the same people. So just to give you a little background on that. So this is a new experience for 7th and 8th graders.
Yeah. I think, there's so much in that, right? And I think with age group of kids, right, there's a different set of challenges right now. And I think, in the middle school age, like it's the same challenges that we have in any time, that are are specific to those ages. And then, I think there's just more anxiety about it, right? And of course, with middle school, there's all of the complicated social dynamics. And so, now there's just this added complexity about not being together or not being together as much. Now, all of these schools, including this school, has been on a hybrid model the majority of the year. Is that right?
Hybrid or a remote option, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Right. So, I think, in a lot of ways, this is coming probably from your kids. Either, your kids have ideas about, what they want to be doing, and then you're in the position of having to decide, is this safe? Is this okay? And so, I think, what parents are having to do is to kind of figure out what are the ground rules, for our family, and that's within the context of the community, right, too. So like some school communities, are setting rules around play dates, around outside activities, around travel, and so kind of keeping in mind those ground rules, your own comfort, kind of what is acceptable, and then there's kind of, your kids telling you, these people are doing this, and can I do that? Whether that's, something that's happening in person and having to figure out whether that's safe, or, of course, a lot has moved online, and then that kind of parents are again in the position of having to manage, the social media engagement, which, families do, really differently, and I think is really challenging at this age. I think, probably, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is to to keep a similar kind of structure and set of parameters that you may have had before. And I would think about that in terms of social media. Like on the one hand, that's often a way that kids want to go to more to stay connected. On the other hand, there are the same issues, that have always been there. So I think without that, thinking about really how these things were managed, how you were setting these parameters before, because that's really, I think in this age group, it's all about kind of setting the parameters that you feel comfortable with, and then negotiating it with your kids. And it comes out differently with different kids, and in different families.
To bookmark that just a little bit, would you say that asking, my middle school experience isn't obviously the same as my son's, but is it bad for parents to knock on the door and promote, or is that only causing more anxiety for them to be like, who did you talk to in school today? Did you meet anybody? What, do you want to go walk to Starbucks with somebody? Did you meet somebody new? Does that just cause more anxiety for them? Or should we just wait and see if they ask the question or open the door to have that conversation? Do you understand the question?
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, I think, and it depends on what kind of kid you have, right? Some kids are, I think all kids are anxious and really kind of caught up with social dynamics in middle school, but whether they're, but I think what that looks like is very different, whether they're the kid who's like, worried if people are going to like them, worried if they're going to be accepted, or whether they're, the ones who are kind of, creating the social plans and kind of, the issue is more that like they're out there and they know what they want to be doing. And the tension is like with the, between the kids and the parents in terms of like the parents setting a limit. And obviously, those are sort of extreme examples, and there's a lot that goes on in between. But yeah, I think, if your kid is anxious about, about making friends, right. You don't want to be on top of them all the time, sort of with that same anxiety, right? Like they're anxious about it and then you're anxious about it too. So I, in that scenario, I tend to wait for them to come to you and talk about it. But at the same time, if you're concerned that your kids are, get involved in social media in a way that's, you think is excessive, or you think is having a negative impact on them, not being afraid to set ground rules, I think is important.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, am I next, Kevin?
It's me. This question comes from Hillcrest Elementary School. We have 11 elementary schools that go from pre-K through 6th grade in our school district. This is a common one that I do hear a lot from our families. How should we address kids' fears and trepidation when reintegrating our children back into social situations when we've been so isolated? I hear this, in the immediate right now as sports start to open back up, very limited, but I think there are a lot of questions when things eventually do open up. How do we address kids' fears? Because for so long, they've been isolated.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, preparing them, and I think having conversations about it, beforehand, just to let them kind of chew on it. And, depending on the kids, some kids, are sort of chomping at the bit, right, to be doing more. And some, I think may feel like, what is okay. And, and I think this relates to, this sort of larger question of, of managing anxiety. Like, what do we're living in this, in this world where there is, there is this danger around us, right? And so how do we manage that, and what message do we send to our kids? And so I think, yes, you want to teach your kids how to do things in a safe way and sort of what the ground rules are, but not necessarily that they have to worry about it. And so I think the same thing goes as things start to open up. There's an age-appropriate way of talking about it that may have more or less detail in terms of why are things opening up, what is better, kind of letting kids know enough about, the infection rates have gone down, there's a vaccine so people can protect themselves. So, whatever narrative you want to kind of give them so they have some understanding of why this is happening. And so now, the experts are saying that it's safe for us to do X, Y, and Z. And I think, because I think what the kids actually what they'll respond to isn't just the information, but is how it's delivered. And I think if we can be kind of calm and even and kind of matter of fact with it and our delivery, then it doesn't have to be so anxiety provoking. It's a bit like, you teach your kids to wear a helmet when they ride a bike, not because you don't wear a helmet because bike riding is a terrifying activity, but they wear a helmet so they can do it safely. And, the same thing goes for, the kinds of precautions we're taking right now, like wearing a mask. Wearing a mask doesn't mean you have to be terrified to go out. It means that you can do it safely. So I think it's just kind of being, giving age appropriate information and just kind of being matter of fact that this is sort of the update, and showing them that, you're calm and you're managing it. And I think they will go along.
This next question kind of dovetails that, and I've experienced it a little bit with my own children, about being in school, then being out of school, and then being in school. So this follow-up question, how can my children feel rooted during the times of COVID-19 when the changing needs and requirements of society continually put their understanding in permanent flux? And I think we've all experienced that, particularly with schools. At one point, people said they weren't safe. Now they are safe. How do you deal with that when you may have a black and white kiddo who, says, well, wait a second, 3 months ago, you told me this wasn't safe, and now all of a sudden it's safe?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's really, right. It does go back to what we were talking about with the last question, where what you want to address is their anxiety, right? And by talking to them about it in a calm way, what kids really look to their parents to do is to, help them contain things emotionally. And so when you are demonstrating that you can talk about this thing, and even with limited information, we thought that this was the right thing. It turns out this is a better thing. But what they're picking up on really is your affect, your tone, your body language, your facial expression. And that's giving them the information to know, whether they can feel safe.
You're
go
up,
ahead. This question came in from St. Mary's. I feel like our children are all going to be germaphobic after living through this. Do you have any suggestions? That kind of piggybacks off of what Kevin was asking, but the hand washing and all those things, and then just being like in the beginning of the pandemic with, you can't go here, you can't do this. How can we reintroduce them and not have them be worried about the germs?
Right. So I think again, it's sort of your attitude towards it. Like, this is just a thing that we do to keep ourselves safe, which in the beginning it was hard, right? Because everyone was really scared, because this is a really scary thing. So it's not that you have to be perfect and have zero anxiety, but to just remember, to just like check in with yourself and be like, oh man, you know, I'm really anxious about this right now, and you know, and recognize it and find you know, and find outlets for it. I mean, I noticed this with my son very early. I'll share this little anecdote. So my son, you know, last March, he was not yet 5, and you know, as you know, we're learning about the coronavirus. It's clear that it's, you know, we're sort of learning increasingly how you know, the extent of things are starting to shut down. And so, you know, I have to tell him something. I have to tell him, why are we not going to school? Why are we not going to see our friends? And initially I was calling, I wasn't calling it the coronavirus. I was calling it a big cold. And, you know, we're, you know, staying at home so that we don't share germs with people, because, you know, the coronavirus doesn't have legs. So if we stay in our house, you know, it can't get from one person to another. It can only get from one person to another if we're close to each other and we're trying not to get sick. So I had this whole little story I came up with. And then he at one point, sort of, after we've been talking about it for a few days, sort of like looked at me and smiled, and he said, you know, Mommy, I'm the coronavirus, except I have legs. And I, you know, went to, you know, my friend Jack's house and I got him sick. And I'm like, as a child psychiatrist, I was like so happy to hear this story, because I'm thinking, oh, you know, he's working on this, he's playing with it. You know, like kids play with bad guys or monsters, or, you know, this is something that's scary, but he's trying to figure out like what to do with it. So I was like so pleased about this. And then very end of March, we heard from, you know, family friends of ours, you know, their son is good friends with my son. And I remember this on a Friday night, got a call from the wife that the husband was intubated, admitted to the ICU. And that weekend, like, just, you know, the tone, everything changed in our house. My husband and I were really, you know, on edge, like, you know, our whole feelings about the pandemic really shifted. You know, we felt unsafe, right? And, you know, I think I was leaving the radio on more when the kids were around. I was distracted, and I was really, you know, unsettled. And then that the next night, my son is like in bed, falling asleep. He's half asleep, and he's talking to himself, and he says, there was a boy in England who got the coronavirus and died. And I thought, wow. So our narrative around the coronavirus has really changed. And like, I have to, you know, he's obviously picking up on what we're feeling, and I have to kind of recognize that and get that in check. So, I mean, I think, and, you know, he didn't like say anything specifically about it or about how he was anxious, but it was just so clear, you know, that he picked up on the tone of this. And so, you know, that's just, you know, a long way of saying that, you know, kids are observing us. They're noticing, you know, our tone, our anxiety, how we're feeling. And so, you know, I think we're not going to do it perfectly, but as much as we can, you know, check in with ourselves and how we're feeling, and, you know, give yourself that permission, right? The time that you need to check in with the people that help you feel calm, feel connected, feel safe, you know, your partner, your friends, your family, and, you know, really doing that and doing that for yourself is important for your kids.
The next question comes from O'Neill, which is the other middle school, but also this parent is a Fairmount Elementary parent as well. How do you deal with depression setting in with a middle school child? And then there's a follow-up question here that also says, when they're in person, because we have a system where they go one day and then the remote the next, this parent's indicating when they're in person, they appear to be fine. It's when they're disconnected at home where they really start to see some of those signs of depression. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is happening. I think, a lot of kids are feeling, less engaged, less motivated when they're not around their peers. And so, I think, and this is hard, right? Because having kids do school at home and you're trying to work, like they need more of you, right? And you don't necessarily have any more time. But I think, finding ways to create opportunities for fun at home. And then also, I think creating, this goes back to one of the earlier questions about the social piece. In some cases, it may, your kids may benefit from help, finding ways to connect with their friends, like on days when they aren't in school. But with a middle schooler, the nice thing is you can try to invite them into a conversation about that, like just noticing that that they're having a hard time either staying focused, or they just really seem unhappy, and sort of think with them, like whether there's either a way to connect with other kids or something fun that they'd like to be doing, and just kind of acknowledging that that it's hard, that it's not ideal, and that it's the reality, and trying to think of something that can make it a little more pleasant for them, even though you can't fix it completely.
I think one of the other themes we've seen in the questions tonight, whether we're talking about a kindergartner who hasn't been able to make those connections yet and establish their friend group, or with new people who may have just moved to Downers Grove, and how do you, for kiddos who are new or aren't able to build those friend connections, how do you cope with that, and how do you really work with your children when all they're able to do is socialize with their members of their family?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it is really and this isn't an issue for everybody, right? Families who have moved, people who are looking for jobs and trying to network, like this is sort of a time when everyone is kind of hunkering down and trying to just manage what's in front of them, and people aren't looking to sort of expand their network and branch out. And so I think for people in situations who need that, it's hard, and it's not it's not ideal. I mean, I think I think with our kids, and again, it's sort of within the parameters of whatever sort of you're doing for your family in terms of any kind of contacts. But I think if they're able to identify kids that they want to connect with, then I think trying to help support them in that. But I think also there's I think there's the anxiety about there's a common anxiety, right, among kids about missing out on things socially. And so I think that's always there, but the reality now is that there isn't really much going on, and there isn't much to miss out on. So to some extent, right, setting that aside and using it as using the time that the family has together to kind of discover things that people like to do together. Like, does the family like to cook together? Is there a game that everyone can enjoy? Like, sort of taking it on as a challenge, especially if you have kids with different ages and different interests. Like, what can we find that we all want to do together on a Saturday night, and kind of trying to create that positive time. Because I think especially with, kind of middle school age kid, with all kids, but I think especially as they get older, like that, they're just missing that contact with their peers. It's so central for them. And so you want to support it in whatever ways you can. They want to have a FaceTime call with their friends, those kind of things. But you also just want to build in like fun and positive activities in the family that, help to some extent take the place of what they can't do with their friends in the same way right now.
You touched on how other families are, or with social media. One of the questions that came in was, what advice do you have for talking to children who are jealous of activities their friends get to do? This is probably for an older age kid. Right. And when they're feeling left out, if a family has made a decision as a family that they're going to socially distance and not have any get-togethers or interact with other people outside of their household, and they're sitting on Instagram or Snapchat and see these three friends are down in the city walking around getting cupcakes, like how do you deal with that with your kids when, as a family, you've made the decision together that that's how you're going to do it, but it still sucks when you see your friend group doing something different. Do you have any suggestions for how to make that hurt less ouchy or stingy?
Yeah, I think, and this is something people face, right? Not just during COVID, but families have different rules about, what kids are allowed to do at different ages, who can be on social media, all kinds of things like that, and kids know exactly what everyone else is allowed to do and are always comparing. And so, I think parents know, when they take an unpopular stance on something that, they have to be prepared for that pushback. And so, you pick your battles, right? And I think when you feel strongly about something, you're firm with the limit. You want to be empathic, I think, to a point, and say, I get it. I get that you want to be doing this. And, I'm doing what I think is best, but, other people's parents do things different ways. And so, I think different, depending on whether, kids are sad or feeling left out, or, they're angry and you have to manage their anger. It's different things that come up, but I think that's just, that's the reality of what parents face when they set limits. It's not fun, but I think, as you're typically, as there's this kind of, initially when something is new, kids really try to push back in the hopes that they're going to get it changed, right? But then as it's just sort of consistently applied, typically, they get used to it and they back down. So I think that, when you feel strongly and you make a decision and, you stick with your guns and you stick through that initial period, kids usually will eventually move on.
A lot of other, as we pull out themes for this, what indicators would help a parent to seek professional help for a child's mental health? There's many parents who are wondering, is this typical, or should I go see or seek help for this? What are some indicators as a therapist that parents should be looking out for where maybe it's beyond what they can handle at home?
Yeah. So, I think, what we think about typically are, work, which for kids is school, and relationships. And so if, I think what's sort of typical, is kids being a bit more anxious, but you're able to reassure them. Kids may be a little less motivated and may need a little bit more support, a little bit more encouragement, to get through their schoolwork. And they may be sad about not being able to be around their friends, and they may be mad when parents set limits. I think all of that is expectable. I think when parents should be more concerned is when there's been a really dramatic decline in how a child's doing academically. They were a great student before, and now they're really disengaged. They're not doing their work. There's really been a significant shift there, or they're really, or a really significant emotional shift. They're really consistently angry, really withdrawn. Don't seem to be able to enjoy themselves very much. Or, if they're anxious to the point that it's like distracting. They can't focus on their schoolwork. They're maybe having trouble getting to sleep. They're, complaining that their head hurts or their stomach hurts, sort of consistently. I mean, those are all things that, to me would signal something's going on.
Another question that came in was, what is the single most impactful thing I can do or refrain from doing to support my kids? Like, is there something I shouldn't be doing anymore, or something I should be doing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I mean, I think, we're talking about self-care, and I think really recognizing how you're doing and how things are impacting you, right? Because your kids, this is always true that, kids are even when they're ignoring you and they don't listen to a thing you tell them, they're paying attention to you and they're taking in, how you're feeling about something, right? And so, I think, really kind of recognizing that, and I think also feeling, I think it's a time, when people feel so powerless, but I think really feeling empowered as parents to do what feels safest and most comfortable to you, because that is going to help you be less anxious, and you being less anxious is going to help your kids be less anxious.
Great. Another one that came in, I had it, my bad eyes. How can parents help young children understand why they need to follow COVID safety rules, like no hugging friends or stuff like that? Telling a 5-year-old you can't go run to your friend and hug them.
Yeah. I mean, what's crazy, right, is how quickly kids, I think, have kind of gotten used to these rules, these sort of new normal. I tend to, to just want to give kids very kind of factual information that's not too much. It's not going to overwhelm them, but that sort of helps it make sense for them. Like, 4 or 5-year-olds, talking about, like, they know about getting sick. And so, I talk about it like that. I told you the little story about the coronavirus, and the coronavirus doesn't have legs. And, you can sort of tell them a little story, and they will, and I think young kids especially will really hold on to those kinds of to those stories, and especially around that age, they're they're really interested. They're starting to get interested in rules and what the rules are. And so if just sort of explaining, quite simply and matter-of-factly, we're trying not to share germs so we don't get sick. That's more or less what I tell my kids. And and I think that they don't do it perfectly, but I remember I was like kind of I was kind of blown away by like how quickly, like I think it was within a couple weeks, when we would over the summer, would sometimes see people outside, like how few times I had to remind my son to not touch his friends and to, keep distance from them. It really, I think that they're used to being told rules that they don't quite understand, but they get that they have to follow. And so I think a little story and then, you can do this and you can't do that. And I think young kids do pretty well with that.
One of the most common questions that I get as the superintendent is there's a lot of anxiety from parents, and much of it is justifiable, about kids falling behind in school and worrying long-term about what that may mean for their future. Even though our district has been one of the districts that has been open more, the reality is we haven't been able to, because of all the health guidelines, be open like we would in a normal year. So again, there's a great deal of fear that children are falling behind, and it's causing a lot of stress that can then be placed on the child. So how do you help parents like all of us who now we're in almost a year of this and things still aren't back to normal? How do you help deal with the future question?
I think as much as possible, just try to, I think refocus, help people refocus on the social and emotional piece, because I think that if children are still enjoying learning and engaged in school and engaged with their family and doing as well as they can socially and emotionally, that's I think how we set them up to be able to go back into the classroom and absorb whatever pieces of material that they didn't get completely. Because I think that part, that they will make that up. To some extent, this whole cohort of students has been impacted, by this. And I can only imagine that for generations, we will be trying to understand that impact. But I think that in terms of, preparing them to return to something more like normal life in the future and to be able to be successful, that really helping them, to find joy, to feel comfortable, to feel relaxed in their lives right now is the most important thing that parents can do for them.
Another question that's come in, and this is more broad stroke, but could you address tools or ideas, tips to assist with the parent-child relationship? Obviously, with everyone under one roof, whether they're hybrid or remote, there's added stressors in all households, but what might have once been a really great parent-child relationship may be taxed right now. And do you have any tips for how to rebuild or repair a parent-child relationship during this time?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think this is one of the things that's really tough, right? Like, some people do homeschool their children, but most of us send our children to school, and a big, important function of that is that it, there are many functions of it, but it hugely unburdens, the parent-child relationship from, the responsibility for sort of teaching and correcting. And I mean, because parents are doing that, anyway. I mean, that's part of what we do as parents. We're teaching our children, we're correcting them. But I think, with your parent as your primary academic teacher or coach or any of those things, it puts a burden on the relationship, right? And so, I think it's really important to notice that, and to not just feel like, why is my kid so mad at me all the time? But I think that parent, I'm sure, is very right that this setup is significantly burdening the relationship. And so, I think, if there are particular subjects in school that, like, you were a math major and your kid is struggling in math, and like you butt heads every time you try to help them with their math, recognizing that, seeing if, is there somebody else, maybe even virtually, who can, another family member, or, an uncle they like, or whoever, like, sort of notice what the biggest pain points are, and see if there's a way to address that. And I think the other thing is, as much as you can, finding ways to spend positive time together, where you're not teaching, you're not instructing, like you're doing something together that the child likes, that's fun, where the parent doesn't have to be teaching or in any kind of evaluative or critical role.
Non-naggy. Don't be a nag. Like my house.
Yeah, like build Legos with your kid, and you have no idea how to do it, and they're the Lego, champion, and just admire how they do it, or something that is fun, and that your kid enjoys, and where that's not going to be where you get out of that dynamic with them, basically.
Take the edge off. Okay.
Just to piggyback off of that, we did get a question that came in that talked about, when you're all home in the same house, how do you go about building those positive relationships? I could speak for probably many parents on this call, where if I left my kids to their own, wishes, they would be on their devices and more screen time, which is the opposite of what we want during this time. So how can you go about building those positive habits? You talked about, discovering your child's interest. Anything more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, how do you lure your kids into spending time with you, right? When they're little, all they want is to spend time with you. And then as they get older, right, they're off in their rooms on their devices. And so how do you bring them back? And I mean, I think, it's like, what do they want to do? Like, think of the thing that your kid would be willing to do, even if they had to do it with you, right? Like, finding things, and if you multiple kids in the family, like making it okay, so Friday night is the time we're going to spend together, and so and so got to choose last week, and so and so is going to get to choose this week, and making kind of a routine or a ritual around some time that is a little sacred for the family, where there's kind of a routine around who picks what you do, and everyone is available to participate. And you can't do it every night, because then it just becomes a burden. But I think finding some time for that is really important, and it's it's something we can do during this time. Tracy, you're muted.
I'm reading. This question came in from Henry Puffer. Elementary. My kids already had an attachment to me pre-COVID. How can I prepare them to go back to school after being by my side for a year? Weaning them.
The opposite problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always one or the other, right?
Yeah.
You want to be with us the perfect amount. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. And families are in different situations in terms of whether they're hybrid or remote. But I think recognizing that transition is going to be a challenge for your child, and, you know, finding ways to sort of introduce, to do it in steps. Like, if they're going to be, if the idea is that they're going to be back in school in the fall, whatever you do with them over the summer that feels safe and comfortable to you, that somehow builds in some structure that doesn't involve them being with you 24 hours a day, because I think that's right. If you don't want them to go from with you 24 hours a day to, you know, away from you 7 hours a day, as the parent's anticipating, that's not going to go well. So I would say follow that instinct, and you know, find things that they want to do, that they're, you know, excited about. Maybe there's an outdoor activity over the summer that you feel is safe, something they want to do, you sign them up. That kind of thing. I think anticipating that, and exactly like this parent is suggesting, the kid's going to need some help getting prepared. So I think that's right.
Believe it or not, we're getting toward the last 5 minutes, and this is another theme that's come up. But we had a parent who just put in our chat here, what long-term social emotional effects do you feel the pandemic has had on children? This is one that I often get as a superintendent, and obviously this isn't in my background. Academics are one thing we can offer, you know, some summer school and tutoring and those types of things. But what about the social emotional long-term impacts? And I know every kid is different, but in your field, what are you hearing? What are you discussing? What are some things that we can look toward as parents, you know, down the road here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's so different. Families have been impacted so differently. And so, you know, for some kids, they're, you know, sort of missing the structure of school and more time with friends. And, you know, some families have really been turned upside down by this, and it's much more. But, you know, I think that, you know, and I think to this last question too, I think as much as we can, you know, trying to create some sense of structure and of normalcy, because I think, you know, what we're seeing, you know, most often is issues that kids are having are either feeling anxious or, you know, feeling bored, withdrawn, disengaged, and just kind of, you know, and I think this isn't just kids. This is sort of a broader phenomenon. I think with so many people sort of being remote and so many parts of life not happening, it's like, it's almost like we're hibernating, like we're kind of operating at this kind of lower level of energy. And I think we're going to have to prepare to some extent to, you know, to exert the amount of energy it takes to be out in the world every day, in the way that we were. And so, you know, so I think, you know, ways we can help our kids to prepare for that is, you know, on the one hand, being flexible. Like there in many ways more restrictions than there were before. There's so many things kids can't do. But also, you know, with more time at home, there's less structure. So, you know, without being rigid about it, having sort of flexible structure at home, having consistent expectations about, you know, clearing the table, cleaning your room, getting up, getting dressed, you know, these kinds of things to just keep a routine and keep kind of consistent expectations. And I think that sets kids up for it to be less of a shock to the system. when, as things do open up more.
Fantastic. I went through all the questions that I had received.
Yeah, believe it or not, I think we're at the end.
The hour goes very quickly. Thank you so much, Dr. Levy, for joining us today. And thank you to the Ed Foundation for sponsoring tonight's, there she is, Janet, for sponsoring tonight's webinar. This will be posted tomorrow.
Before I forget, one thing I can do is I have a series of slides, and my last slide has some resources on it that I can share my screen really quickly here. If I can do that. Just have a couple of websites that I think have some really good information about kids and some resources if families are looking for some more help. So I just go ahead and share this.
We see it.
Great.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much for sharing this. We'll have this on the Education Foundation Facebook page, as well as the District 58 YouTube channel. And then we'll send this link as a follow-up to everyone that's registered. So I guess, Tracy, I don't know if you want to close out, but we wanted to just say thank you, because this is our first webinar with Dr. Levy. I think on behalf of Kevin and Tracy too, we're just very grateful that we have a platform to talk about these types of things. And again, if you have any topics that you'd like for us to cover, we'd love suggestions. Send us an email. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's wonderful to know that we can support the community this way.
Thank you so much, Janet. Thank you so much to the Ed Foundation of District 58 and Dr. Levy. It was a pleasure. And lots of different topics, lots of running themes, definitely. So we just need to all start talking more and opening up and being willing to share. I think that's where you learn what's happening in your house is probably happening in somebody else's house too. So there's comfort in that, I think. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.